No, they're not here, no. That's Gina's little granddaughter. It's her first one. She's 7 months old.
Oh, that's Michelle's. Is it Michelle?
Must be, hey? Two girls are in there.
You wouldn't even notice.
I am so pleased to see so many of you here. It just warms my heart, believe me. I'm of a what generation that is gone, and I'm afraid that Art and I are what's left. It's what you got. So we're very happy to be here with you. I was a little concerned as to what I should speak about tonight, because I knew there was going to be a lot of young people that might think, oh my goodness, what's that what we're going to talk about. However, I suddenly realized that this is a family reunion, and this is my chance to tell you a few things about your ancestors. The real reason that we are here and studying their story, it seems almost like an adventure. So many hardships were endured.
Hold the microphone for you.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, I'm shaking. So many hardships were endured, and they were always looking for a better life, and at the same time making our country better for us. I decided to begin with the story of William and Charlotte Lytle. I can recall so many things about them. They lived only a mile away from me when I was a young child growing up. And I spent a lot of time with them. I always had a place to go when Mom didn't agree with me. I remember my grandmother sitting under a coal oil lamp, knitting or crocheting. She could knit a pair of socks in a day, and she could knit a pair of children's mitts in an evening. Okay, Grandpa Lytle, I have to tell you a funny story about him. He lived to be 91, but when he was 90, he happened to grow a tooth in his gum, and it was really bothering him. So the doctor decided that he should pull that tooth, which he had to. At that time, Dr. Blakely was both the dentist and the doctor. So he said, William, I have to take you to the hospital to do this. And Grandpa Lytle says, no, you are not taking me to no hospital. I have never been in a hospital in 90 years. You think I'm going to go now? So anyway, Dr. Blakely took him to his office, pulled the tooth, and Grandpa went home. Everybody was happy. Maybe that's what's happening to our healthcare system. Too many people are going to the hospital in less than 90 years. Who knows? Okay. William was born in Westmeath on the Lytle farm in 1854. Charlotte was born in Forster's Falls on the Black farm in 1859. They lived there in their childhood and teenage years, and they were married in Forster's Falls. They had 6 boys. Their journey begins in Minnedosa, Manitoba, where they settled sometime after 1888 and before 1894. They only stayed there for 6 years. I can tell you very little about their life there, but I do know that these dates are right because my dad was born in Ontario in 1888, so they were still in Ontario then. Uncle Roy and Uncle Edgar, I believe, were born in Manitoba. As Uncle Roy was born in 1890 and Uncle Edgar in 1892. I'm sorry I don't have any more information, but maybe Joey does. Okay. Now, here's your history lesson. In 1905, two prairie provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, joined the Dominion of Canada. Things began to grow in Saskatchewan. The government was smart and realized that the present inhabitants of the Ball Prairies were not going to do any of the back-breaking work to promote the growth of the land. So they offered each man and his sons a section of land, 160 acres, free with the agreement that they would plow the land, pick the stones, cut the bush, and make the land arable. And so people came from Ontario, Quebec, United Kingdom, and several other European countries. They were truly the settlers. They were a working group of settlers. I just can't see that.
Sorry.
And we can now thank them for the majestic fields that we see now on the prairies. Remember, your ancestors were part of that group. Sadly, nowadays, very few accolades are given to these people who worked so hard to sacrifice a great deal for us. So, in 1906, once again, William and Charlotte pulled up stakes for the USA. I think that was cool. Okay, you have to bear with me. Okay. In 1894, they moved to Chicago Heights, USA. Now, they were in Ontario before that. Then they moved to Manitoba, and now they're in Chicago Heights, to get this straight. And once that William set up his blacksmith shop business. My dad, Frank, told me a few stories of his life in Chicago. I gathered that things were good there. He played baseball, and he was on a team there. His uniform and team pictures are in the Dinsmore Museum. He told me a story once about teaching a black adult man to read. In 1905, oh, I already got that one. Should have numbered my pages. Okay. In 1906, once again, William and Charlotte pulled up stakes in the USA. In 1906, William and Leonard, who was his second son, age 30 at the time, age 20 at the time, came to Saskatchewan and secured homesteads for himself and his boys. Some had to be what they call promised, and were as they were underage. So they were secured in later years. William and Leonard had returned to Chicago and loaded up a railway car with horses, machinery, blacksmith equipment, and one cow. I don't know how they did that. They did. And in 1907, they set out once again for Hanley, Saskatchewan. That was the end of the railroad line. In the winter of 1907, Charlotte set out with her 4 youngest boys by train. This trip took 1 week due to extremely bad snowstorms. She and the boys stayed with relatives in Hanley. That would be the Moores. That's where they came into the picture. Until she had her own, stayed there with them until she had her own home on the homestead. I can imagine 1 week on a train with 4 boys. She did it. William set up his blacksmith business once again, which proved lucrative, as all the field work and transportation was done by horsepower. All their staples, flour, sugar, meal, etc., came as far as Hanley, which was 2-day round trip by horses and wagon. Fortunately, the CPR came a little closer around in 1911. William and Charlotte lived on their homestead their entire lives. They celebrated their 50th and 60th wedding anniversary there. In their later years, they moved into their house with us in the winter and later permanently until they died there. Charlotte in 1948, aged 89. William in 1945, aged 91. They were faithful to each other to the end, despite all their hardships. But they always seemed so happy. I really loved them dearly. They were a grand couple, true blue settlers of our country, and we should be so proud of them as our ancestors. Now I will tell you something about their family of boys. Harry was born in Ontario in 1882. I did not know Uncle Harry or remember him visiting very often in Saskatchewan, although I know he did. I did discover that he sold his homestead in 1912 and went back to the States. I believe he lived in California and worked many years for General Electric. However, I remember vividly when he died. I was about 11 years old, I believe. He died in 1946 at age 64 of a heart attack. Grandma Charlotte was living with us by now. Grandpa had just died the year before. We were all having supper one night after we got word that Harry had died. I looked at Grandma and she was crying. I asked her, Grandma, why are you crying? And she said, someday you will understand. And I do. The second son was Leonard. He was born in Ontario, 1886. Apparently he never had a homestead, unless it was under his father's name. No mention of it in my books anyway. I don't think he liked the prairies. So he went back to the USA and joined the US Army. We had begun, World War had begun, Unfortunately, he was accidentally shot and died in 1919 at age 33. Grandma Charlotte would not believe that he had died. So somehow he was brought back to Saskatchewan and buried in the Boston Cemetery, 2.5 miles from Grandma Grandpa's farm. Let's skip page here. Frank was born in 1888 in Pembroke, Ontario. I can tell you so many things about my wonderful dad. He was a hard-working, despite a very bad back. He suffered from a fall into a well, breaking his spine and landing on his heels. He was nursed back to health by his mother, Grandma Charlotte, never once entering a hospital. Frank built quite a home, 2-story yet, on his homestead. Though the years he just kept adding on, because the house grew as I grew up in it, as did my 5 brothers and sisters. When my brother Lee took over the farm, he remodeled it, and he and his family lived in it also. Finally, about 10 years ago, the Dinsmore Fire Department burned it down as a teaching demonstration for volunteer firemen. However, the barn is still standing on the homestead as a sentinel. It was very sturdily built around 1930. And excuse me, I have to have a drink. It's dry in here.
It's dry, that's right.
Is your arm okay? Yep. My dad loved baseball. He had played a lot in Chicago and in Saskatchewan before he had his accident. That didn't stop him when afterwards watching all the games at the sports days. He also loved his hockey games. I can remember as a kid on Saturday night, all the chores had to be done by 6 p.m. Then he was glued to the radio to hear Foster Hewitt announcing it's hockey night in Canada, Newfoundland. Of course, you can guess who his team was. Toronto Maple Leafs. My dad never left his homestead. He loved his land. And somehow he managed to enlarge his quarter section a great deal. And always kept cattle, pigs, and chickens. He and Mom finally retired to Wyston in 1956. They had a few years of a life of ease. However, my dad died very suddenly, New Year's Day, 1966, at age 78. My mom died in October of 1966, age 70. I don't think she could live without him after 40 years of marriage. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Okay. Roy was born in 1890 in Manitoba. Uncle Roy worked his homestead and did several jobs as well. In 1908 and 9, he delivered mail to various homesteads, and he even crossed the ferry at McCrory. When World War I started, he served in the U.S. Army in 1914 to 18. After the war, he gave up his homestead and stayed in the U.S., living in Oregon, until his death in 1967, age 77. I really liked Uncle Roy. He came back to Saskatchewan and visited us often. He always had stories to tell. When I graduated from nursing in 1958, he sent me a letter inviting me to their place in Oregon, I think to test out the American system of nursing. But I didn't go because I had just accepted a position in Saskatoon in emergency, so I had to stay put. And I still have that letter. Okay. That's done. Oh, by the way, if Kelly has anything more to talk about her dad, she's here. That's his granddaughter. Okay, we can skip here. All right. Edgar was born in 1892 in Manitoba. I knew Uncle Edgar quite well. He lived only 2¼ miles from our farm, and he visited often. I always liked him very much. He was a good man. Uncle Edgar was a good farmer. He enlarged his homestead of a quarter section to a great lake. Uncle Edgar was a very talented artist. I know most of you are familiar with his drawings, some of them revealing his homestead days. I remember Uncle Edgar playing the violin at the dances at Pontiac School. What fun we had as he belted out the Missouri Waltz or a rousing two-step, as young and old danced their hearts out. Sadly, Uncle Edgar passed away in 82, at age 90. Their last son, Burton, was born in 1896 in the Chicago Heights. Uncle Bert helped Williams farm his homestead and also farmed Roy's land while he was away in the Army. This lasted on 1927 when he left for Toronto, where he took a mortician's course. He returned to Davidson, Saskatchewan, and had an undertaking business for 25 years. Following that, he owned a jewelry store in Davidson, where he lived until he died in 1976, age 84. So that is the saga of the William and Charlotte Lytle family. It kind of makes me tired just thinking of all their moving from place to place in these difficult days. I've done a lot of moving in my day, but never on those conditions. And Grandma had 3 children and gave birth to 3 more en route. I hope you have enjoyed hearing of their adventures and feel more knowledgeable of our ancestors, of whom we should have great pride. They strive to make our world better, and we can surely reap from their efforts. I guess what I'm saying is that by having these reunions, we can give our ancestors great tribute and carry the torch for the Lytle family. They are never to be forgotten. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Murray and all his helpers for organizing and presenting us with a most enjoyable and unforgettable weekend reunion. And Noel, thank you for your hospitality and work and letting us trample over your nice yard. Okay? I believe that's it. Yeah. It has been my pleasure to relate to you some of our family history. Thank you for your time and attention.